Hey everybody, Dr. Barty here, and I am ready to talk to you guys about the methods that we're going to be using as our tools in the next big project. After you guys finish up your creative writing portfolios, which is going to be due in a couple of weeks here, you're going to be embarking on, and we're kind of, honestly, we're in a little bit of a transition stage. The next 2 or 3 weeks are kind of the off ramp of the creative writing portfolio and the on ramp onto the road, keeping the metaphor going. The road of the community storytelling project. So I have an overview video that really walks through that project. I'm looking at the assignment description and kind of talking it through for you, because sometimes it helps me to hear the words and to hear other explanations, not just reading it with my eyes. So if you have questions about that project, please feel free to email me. In this video, what I want to do is talk you through some of the methods that we're going to use in the storytelling project. So we are going to be using ethnographic methods for participant observation and interview in order to enact narrative inquiry. So let me pull up my PowerPoint and we can talk through this with some visuals. Let's share the screen. Okay. So here we are, narrative inquiry. Narrative inquiry is going to be the umbrella term that we use to encompass both ethnographic and storytelling methods. They kind of come together for us within the subdiscipline of narrative medicine. So let's see how that happens. Okay, so first, ethnography. If you've taken an upper level class with me before, you know that I love ethnography as a qualitative research method. It's something that I was trained in grad school and have used many times in my own research. And I find it to be an incredibly rich and insightful methodology to frame inquiry of all kinds. For us, it's important to access whatever it is we know. So if you've taken me before, you have a baseline understanding of ethnography. If you've never heard that word before, it's okay. Ethnography is a pretty user-friendly methodology because it really details what you're noticing from your experience. And our 2 readings this week really kind of help outline that. You may have seen those readings from me before because they're really good foundational readings on ethnography. So either you're reviewing them or you're coming to them fresh. But really, ethnography is a qualitative research method. Now, in that first chapter on ethnography, Shirley Bryce Heath and Brian Street talk about how qualitative research writ large often does not get specifically linked to a theoretical framework. Now, I'm not sure that that's so much the case anymore, but certainly at the time of their writing, it was. For us, it's important to think about ethnography as a qualitative research method that is linked to a specific theoretical framework that's housed within a discipline. For us, that discipline is narrative medicine. Okay. So we begin our ethnographic inquiry by asking, what is happening? Not why is this happening? And that's a really germane difference. If we're asking why something is happening, we often are asking things that cannot be empirically demonstrated. But if we ask the question, what is happening here, then we can have some concrete empirical observations that answer that question. So one of the great things about Heath and Street's book is that they really do a good job of quickly and efficiently explaining how ethnography is a recursive process that involves these three loops. Um, Definitely you're gathering data from your observations and your interview, but you also have your own hunches or the things that are niggling around in your mind. I had a mentor one time who talked about these are the ridge points, like when two tectonic plates come together and they smush into each other, or if they're drifting apart. That's where you get mountains and that's where you get canyons. And those are very interesting topographical locations. So places where things are in tension, rubbing up against each other, or where things feel like they can't ever be connected. What's up with those? That's where we can start asking the what questions that will help us guide our observations. So we may be observing something that then brings up a curiosity for us, that then as we're reading and gathering literature and learning more on that end of our project, we start to encounter concepts that maybe frame or explain the things that we're seeing. So it is really just, if you imagine these loops, you've got the two arrows on either side, just think about like a roller coaster. They're looping back and forth. And really, when we're doing ethnographic research, when we're doing this recursive process, we want to be really careful to describe things in positive terms. And I don't mean like optimistic terms. What I mean is what actually does happen, not in terms of what doesn't happen. It is easy to slide into getting at some of guessing about the whys. Oh, well, I don't see this happening. That's because they don't care, right? We can easily slide from things that we don't see happening into explanations that we're fabricating. So for us, we really want to focus on what is happening in the field site where we're going to be observing. Who is present? What are they saying? How does our community tell us that they want us to interact? Okay, so a couple key things with ethnography in general. So we do it through participant observation. That means I am physically present in the space to observe. That also means that my presence changes the space a little bit. And we'll talk more about that in a second. But being a participant observer means that you constantly have to monitor what is asked of me and how is my participation affecting what is happening. Now, Heath and Street talk about comparison versus contrast. So when we ask what is happening, that doesn't mean that we can't hold up comparisons. Well, no, we want to get away from that word. It doesn't mean that we can't contrast what is happening with what might be happening in other locations or what other folks might be expressing. Comparison here, Heath and Street say, is connected to value judgments, an evaluative claim. So that's like saying, if you compare these two pizza places, then you're going to instinctively say, well, comparison, that means which one is better. That's a value judgment. Whereas if you say contrast these two pizza places, now we're getting into what objectively makes them different. So we start itemizing. Well, this pizza place does Detroit style pizza, and this pizza place does thin crust, yada, yada, yada. So we want to, when we're doing ethnographic research, if we are going to be holding up another site or another experience as a contrasting example, we want to make sure that it is more of a contrast than a comparison. If that makes sense. Now, there are some really helpful, what Heath and Street call decision rules. There's a heuristic for those on pages 46 and 47 of this reading. And these decision rules are going to be really helpful for you when you are writing your proposal. So again, see that other video that I have linked this week. Your proposal is going to need you to have the answers to quite a few of those questions. But in general, it's good to, if you are going to be looking for specific things, or if you're trying to be observing particular behaviors or listening for particular stories, it's important to have some decision rules that is going to help you say whether or not something is occurring. Okay, field notes. This is one of the hallmark tools of ethnographic research. That's outlined on page 103 of the reading. It's page 11 in the PDF. Just like, what do your field notes need to contain? And again, if you've taken me and we've done an ethnographic style study before, you kind of know this drill, but you really want to be taking very rich descriptive notes. That does not mean that you can't write in reflections. You just have to figure out what format works best for you. Some people like a free writing approach that then they can go back to and kind of highlight or bold anything that is their reflective or metacognitive value judgment voice. Like, oh, that's weird. That's something that you would highlight as your opinion, man. There's also things like double entry notes that separate both the objective and the reflective aspects of your note taking. So that can just sometimes make it easier. You could also do Cornell style notes, which involves both the double entry style plus some summarization at the bottom. Any style of note taking that works for you to most accurately capture what you are observing, that is the note taking style you should use. Okay, so you may be sitting here going, Dr. Verdi, what does this have to do with narrative medicine and the community storytelling project? Well, once we get into these two pieces by Bleakley and Cologne, we start to see how it all comes together. So Bleakley, stories as data, data as stories. I put this here because it really connects nicely to the Heath and Street chapter on ethnography. Bleakley is talking about how thinking with stories is the definition of narrative inquiry writ large. And so this kind of qualitative research where we are trying to develop really rich, deep listening, deep attentiveness to observation site, to participants who are telling us their stories. This is incredibly well aligned with narrative medicine's goals and priorities. Narrative, of course, comes from the root word meaning to know. So Bleakley highlights how narrative inquiry is getting at knowledge production and even shaping of experiences. So this also is like a cross-reference for us with Charon and the connections and the recursive nature of attention, representation, and affiliation. So maybe that attention representation part of the triad that gets at the knowledge production, but the affiliation is where we start to shape and co-create experiences with the participants. Now, I thought this was just neat because in this article, Bleakley talks about how one of the key goals of narrative inquiry is to make the familiar unfamiliar on page 536. Which is a total cross-reference to Heath and Street. And I don't know if you clocked this, but they talk about making the familiar strange. So this goal is running in parallel. So these two pieces are really showing us how ethnography and narrative inquiry are incredibly aligned. Now, beyond just observation and co-creating the meaning through our rich note-taking practices, Bleakley's highlighting interview and extended interview as a method that can really help us to develop these genres. Towards the end of this piece, Bleakley is going to talk about two key genres that may be inspirational for you as you are thinking about your storytelling artifacts for the community storytelling project. But really, we're trying to think again of actively constructing knowledge together with our community participants. All right. Cologne, I love this piece so much. I had way more highlighted in the article than I could possibly squeeze into this one mini lecture. But really, I think a very important part of Cologne's article is the fact that we as researchers should constantly be asking, along with the what is happening question from earlier, what is at stake? What is at stake for this storyteller, the person who's telling me their story? What are they risking? What are they nervous about? What do they stand to lose in the scenarios that they might be describing to me? This is a really important ethical step for us as researchers to understand so that we get out once again of that comparison value judgment mode. And so Cologne is really going to emphasize for us as well the fact that qualitative research, qualitative data is highly embodied and personal, and we cannot actually divorce our biases from the qualitative research process. So when we are asking what's at stake, we have to do it in a posture of intellectual humility because our biases are just so sneaky. And we don't want to think that we're arriving at some kind of conclusion from our qualitative data gathering, but it's tinged by our personal biases and our tendency to ascribe value judgments. So this is not the quote that's up here on the screen. So actually, I'm going to go back here for a second because I want to read you a precursor quote to the next quote that I want to show you from Cologne. And I hope that this helps us to really take ourselves from the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts of on ethnography, thinking about field notes. Like those chapters give us the pragmatic tools that we're going to use. Cologne here is going to give us a really good set of questions and pointing us to important ethical stances for us as researchers. And key among those is the stance of reflexivity. So Cologne defines reflexivity as this: accounting for oneself within the structuring dynamics of an American society that ideologically insists on the political equivalence between people as citizen subjects and consumers, while constantly producing the life-crushing material stratifications across institutions, especially in our corporatized, time-squeezed, beleaguered healthcare system. I just love this quote because it really does put into perspective why we need to account for our own biases and our own positionality as researchers. It's because we are entering into a complex set of ideologies and cultural structures and systems that insist that people are equal while also enforcing systematic material inequalities. And nowhere is this more maybe magnified or prevalent than in the American healthcare system. So this is why we need to be thinking reflexively about who we are, what our biases are, where our curiosities come from, as we're listening to people's stories and attempting to represent them back to themselves and to caregivers. And so when we're doing these interviews and we're doing participant observation, where we're listening to people's stories and observing parts of their stories, we need to understand that these methods can help us produce data for a purpose. We want to produce data that reveal the layered panoply. I love that. Great, great wording, Cologne. The layered panoply of meaning worlds that live in the dialectical tension with systemic inequality and structural violence. That's on page 263 of that chapter. But this is, I think, part of our rhetorical responsibility when it comes to working with community participants. We're asking folks to give us permission to observe them, and we're asking folks to tell us their stories. And what we do with those stories is very important. It can either contribute to the systemic inequalities and structural violence that are existing. We can reinforce the hegemonic structures, or we can reveal what is happening. We can hopefully speak in truth-telling ways that reveal injustice and can help, we hope, ameliorate those tensions. Okay. Whew. Stop sharing. I'm so excited. I don't know if you can tell or not. It's hard with the screen, but I'm so excited for this project. We are going to get into some really cool communities. We have some really cool opportunities that you're going to hear about on Thursday. And it's going to be really awesome to really put into praxis what we've been learning and what we'll continue to learn about in terms of narrative medicine, storytelling, listening, attention, representation, and affiliation, all of these things. So let me know if you have any questions about anything I've touched on here. I look forward to getting into your creative responses and your reading discussions. And I just posted the reflective journal prompt, so check that out at the end of the week. I will see you guys in our live Zoom on Thursday, 4:30. I'm putting the Zoom link into the announcement. So I'll see you then, guys. Bye.